Thank you for joining me. I'm Dan from English Perfectus. Today we're going to be looking at some common words, some of the most common words. These are words that English speakers use over and over and over again, and English learners tend to rely on them quite a bit. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about some words that you can use instead of these very common ones to sound more fluent, to expand your vocabulary, to sound more natural in your conversations, and to help understand fluent speakers better. This isn't a grammatical lesson or a very tedious and confusing one. It's really using synonyms that fluent speakers use all the time. Because they're so common and they're so versatile and useful, words like very, nice, good, great, big, small, a lot of these words are really useful. So you shouldn't stop using them altogether, but there are several words that you can use instead of these commonly relied on English words. So we're going to go through a lot of these words, and we're going to talk about some of the other English words that fluent speakers use on a daily basis in everyday conversations instead of these overused and heavily relied on words. So here we go. The first one is very. Very is a versatile word, and you shouldn't stop using it. It's very common to use very as an adjective to emphasize the quality of something. If something is very big, it's huge, it's enormous. If something is very small, it's tiny, it's mini. So very is a useful word to use. However, there are several words that you can use instead. So you can just, in almost every context, almost every scenario that the word very is used, you could use the words quite, rather, so, really, and also the word pretty. So if we're looking at an example sentence, the trip we went on was very nice. Nothing wrong with that statement. The trip we went on is very nice. But we could also say, the trip we went on was quite nice. The trip we went on was rather nice. The trip we went on was so nice. The trip we went on was really nice. And you can also use the word pretty. So pretty on its own, people tend to associate with beauty, but it's also used instead of very. So the trip we went on was pretty nice. All of these words are common alternatives to the word very that fluent English speakers use over and over on a daily basis. The next word that English learners rely upon because it's so useful is the word good. So good is the opposite of bad. Fluent speakers use the word good all the time. Good is a good word to use in a lot of different sentences in a lot of different ways. However, you could also say decent, all right, okay. Good is used by fluent speakers in a certain type of context, in a certain scenario. It's usually used when something is average or slightly above average. So average, good, best. So there's best, great, awesome, excellent at the very top, and good is lower than that. So if something's good, it is all right. It's okay. It's decent. If we're going to use it in a sentence, you could say, their team is good. You could also say, their team is decent. Their team is all right. Their team is okay. Decent, all right, okay can all be substituted in for the word good. They're synonymous with the word good. Now, the word great is another very common word. It's a very common adjective used to describe something that's better than good. So average, good, great. If something is great, it's awesome. It's superb. It's excellent. So if we were to say their team is great, that's better than good. Their team is awesome. Their team is excellent. Their team is amazing. Awesome, excellent, amazing. These are commonly used synonyms. Another common word, a common adjective that English speakers use and English learners rely upon is the word nice. Now, nice can be used in a few different ways. If someone is nice, they are kind. They're warm, they're friendly, they are nice. If something is nice, it is of good quality. It's of good value. If you're using nice to talk about a person or the character of a person, you could use lovely. She was lovely. You could also use the word kind. She was kind. If you're describing a thing or a place, so if you were to say, the hotel we stayed at was nice, you could say, the hotel we stayed at was beautiful. Nice, beautiful, when talking about a thing. The hotel we stayed at was enjoyable. Beautiful, enjoyable, when you're talking about a place or a thing, are commonly used instead of the word nice. The next word is hard. Hard. If something is hard, it has usually two different use case scenarios, two different contexts that the word is used in. Hard is another way of saying difficult. So a challenge, something that you have to do that is not easy. A word that fluent English speakers will use instead is difficult, or will say, it was a pain. A pain. So pain usually means that you're hurt, that something is not comfortable, that you're in discomfort. But if you're going to use hard as a way of describing something that's difficult, we'll often say it was a pain. It was a real pain. You could also say something is tough. We had a tough time passing the exam. The exam was tough. The test was tough. I had a tough day. You could also say challenging. So challenging is another way of saying something was difficult. It was hard. Challenging is probably a better word to use in a professional context. So if you're in, for example, a job interview, you could use the word challenging instead of hard to describe a part of your previous job or something that you've done. It implies that you see something as a challenge rather than difficult. So if something is a challenge, you're able to take it on, you're able to overcome. So challenge instead of hard is a good one to use professionally. Hard is also used to talk about something that's physically hard. That's solid. Like this table is hard. I could say that this table is solid. This table is sturdy. So those are words you can use in that context of the word hard. Another commonly used word, one that's relied on by English learners, is the word happy. So if you're happy, you are happy. You're the opposite of sad. If you're happy, you are in good spirits, you're content, you are joyful. Words that we often use instead of happy are delighted, thrilled, joyful, excited, pleased. So an example sentence, they were happy to hear the news. You could say they were delighted to hear the news. They were thrilled to hear the news. They were joyful to hear the news. They were pleased to hear the news. All of these can be used instead of happy. The opposite of happy is sad. Sad is another common English word. It describes someone who is the opposite of happy, who's feeling not good. When you're talking about how someone is feeling, you could use the word down. Instead of sad, they were feeling down. You could say they were crushed. Instead of sad, they were crushed. You could say they were miserable. They were miserable instead of they were sad. Another way sad is used is to talk about something that is not very good, something that is below standards, something that is below an expectation or below a standard. Another word for sad in this way is pathetic. This is a common English word, pathetic. It sounds like a word that's a little more advanced, but is actually very common in everyday English. So you could say, I didn't do well on the tests, I got a sad mark. I didn't do well on the test, I got a pathetic mark. So something that's substandard. Another common English word is many. So when you're talking about the number of something, it describes the quantity of something. Another common word that we use instead is tons. So a ton is a weight. It's a measurement of weight, but we often use that instead of many. If I was to say, he had many pairs of shoes, you could say instead, he had tons of shoes. So he had a lot. A lot is another one, a lot of shoes. He had a lot of shoes. Another common phrase that's used instead of many is a whole bunch. He had a whole bunch of shoes. He had a whole bunch of shoes. Or he had a bunch of shoes. He had many shoes. Another common word is big. Big is talking about the size of something. Something's big or small. A common word that we use instead of big is massive or enormous, or a very common one is huge. Enormous, massive, huge. If you were to say, they live in a big house, you could say, they live in a massive house. They live in an enormous house. They live in a huge house. So all of these are good synonyms for big. Small is another commonly used English word, small. Opposite of big, small. Instead of small, you could say tiny. So they live in a tiny house. You could say mini. They live in a mini house. Mini is short for miniature, but we usually just say mini. If you have a mini phone or a mini car, you have a small phone or a small car. Another word for small is little. This is one we use all the time. They had a little home. I have a little phone. Little. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to see our future content on English fluency. Until next time, keep learning and we'll talk soon.